Station today, doing the annual sort up of lambs. This will be the first time we go through the 2023 drop before they hit the ram. We'll go through these, well, the top end of them 2 more times to use, so we cut them down to a bit of a start today, and then we get them down to refine that a bit further, and then finally just before the ram goes out we're down to the final group. So they get plenty of scrutiny, a lot of subjectivity. We try and make sure we don't burn twins, so we know which ones are singles and which ones are twins and which ones are out of maidens. We focus on the ones that are out of the new genetics, I suppose. So a few years ago we made a change here to move away from old horn, low carcass, sort of traditional genetics into poles with a bit more grunt. Rams now coming from Ernst Blue, and we try and use, select our replacements out of that stuff that's first, second, third even generation of that new genetics. We might not be up to 3 yet, but yeah, so looking forward to today to flick through. I don't know how many thousand lambs we're going to look at, but we'll clarify that detail when we get there. And we often not quite get through them in the day. We'll go through use and wether lamb, so quite a different selection process on them, or I guess you're looking for slightly different attributes. For the wethers, generally favouring singles, because we know that those single-born wethers are going to be slightly finer and cut more wool for their life. So we'd be preferentially selecting singles for the wether flock, and obviously looking for wool quality and wool cut and enough constitution, but not as critical, because those wethers aren't going to lactate. They do go into some pretty tough country, so we need to have enough condition on them. So any real lean ones we're going, but it'll be hand on the back, feel for those lean sheep, check out the wall, check out the type, look for shape, and then move on. We don't have many seconds per sheep today. Definitely more of the art than the science in play today. We use the science pretty hard on the ram selection, so we make sure we're getting those carcass genetics and those worm genetics and those foot rot genetics in the rams. And then today it's about getting back some numbers. It's dry in here, so lambs are probably a bit tougher than average. Normally it's pretty good in here in the summer. It normally catches some northwest rain, which just hasn't been happening this year. Looking forward to flicking through those lambs. Once we get into the ewe lambs, which we'll do first, we're looking for shape, that constitution and wool, but obviously we'll take a slightly off wool type if it looks like it's going to have plenty of lambs. There's a terminal flock running here, so we can flick those more carcassy ewes with a bit off wool type, go pretty handy in that terminal flock over time. So we'll be flicking keeping a few that will go into there eventually. But then we're looking for our sort of first class ewes, which have got a good balance of wool, carcass, and general type. Flicking through it pretty fast. These sheep are too young really to see much structural difference, but we'll knock out anything we see where feet have gone haywire or any obvious structural faults. So it'll be pretty quick flick through. We'll go through them a few more times before we get them to the ram eventually. Obviously been a bit of moisture here. Last time I was up here, that loosened crop didn't look very exciting at all, so there's been a bit of moisture, starting to get a bit of a lift in, a bit of greenery around, which the young sheep will be enjoying. No sign of any wind here yet. When the big fan gets going here, she gets seriously going. We're not too far from the west coast, and it feels like it's been cultured by rock some days, and certainly have in previous years. But we've got a bit of overcast, sitting at 12 degrees. Yeah, it could be a good day for sorting through a few lambs, but never say never. In South Island, New Zealand, things can change pretty quickly. This job is getting a bit harder. It used to be 4 or 5 years ago when we first did this. It was a bit easier because we were changing genetics, and you could easily pick those off types. The old types are more narrow, wrinkly sort of horn genetics, short staple. Yeah, really easy to pick. And now, as we're getting more progressive, it's going to get tougher because we can get more choosy, which means we've got more selection pressure, more on the right slot. So we've got more. I guess it's a harder job because we can get more picky with what we take home and what we keep in the flock. So still having a long time to make those decisions. So we'll be moving pretty quick, but then trying to make sure we get the right ones to retain. Obviously, there's a bit more art and science in this job. We don't have a lot of information, but we do use that information on the rams. But yeah, interesting day. Ewe lambs out of the mixed age ewes. Taking the bottom end off them and tying them up pretty well. And obviously tough going through lambs in a tough year. You're going to see video with decent grass around and decent loose and stuff, but as a rule the ewes have been out on hill that's pretty dry, and so not a lot of feed around, and that's reflected in the lambs. There's some great lambs there, and then some that were struggling. And I guess it just reiterates every time the power of the environment to adjust what we see in terms of genetics. So obviously animals from 2 tooth were underdone a bit. Even the 4 tooth look good. The ones from 6 tooth not so good, and that would be just lactational country where they were running, and the amount of legume in that pasture, the quality of the pasture they were on, and obviously there's not always enough places to put twin bearing ewes to maximise their lactation, so that can impact on them. I guess fortunate to have notches in the ears of the singles and twins in most of the mobs, and again that is really powerful in terms of making that selection decision. You can look at an animal and it was very evident yesterday that twin out of 2 particularly was struggling, twins generally a little bit back obviously, and at this age when they're only a month off weaning or whatever, then it's a massive impact. As we go through life it gets less, but it's still there. So why are we going through lambs at this age, I suppose? And the main reason was to get back to fighting weight a bit. There's not a lot of feed around for ewes out in the hills, so carrying a heap of lambs through is going to impact the amount of feed that's available for those ewes. Or you can, if those lambs hang around and don't get on to good feed, then you've got those ill thrift problems and just a real struggle to keep those lambs up. So better to move them on and look after next year's crop by getting the condition back on the ewes while you can, while there's a bit of feed around, and try and get them back up to good condition so that when the time comes to put the ram back in, that they're back in condition. So it makes sense to move them on, but it makes making decisions about those genetics a little bit hard. But there's plenty of fat left in the system, so we select more than we're going to go on as replacements, so there's plenty of time to sort out those that develop later on. There's still the ones that would be culled regardless of how well they were fed. So the overly wrinkly ones, the ones that have got were dry in the wall, as in not a lot of nourishment, letting a bit of dust in, they are all going to go anyway, and so the season doesn't change that too much. Although obviously you can feed on nourishment. So some mobs came in looking pretty shiny, and other mobs not so much, just depending on where they were leading up to yesterday. The thing just to drive home time and time again is that impact of what the environment does to genetics. We all think that what we're seeing is what we get, or that's just an outplay of genetics. But once you see a few different mobs, a few different nutritional environments, and you know that the age of the mum that these lambs are all from, and where they were running, it's such a powerful thing. So anyway, great team yesterday to go through the lambs with, the whole team pulling together, and when you go through that number of lambs, there's obviously a lot of warmed up a little bit in the back half of the day, and plenty of dog work, plenty of pushing lambs around, and the team went on to weigh the cull ewe lambs after that as well. So big solid day for them, and much appreciated to make my job really easy to flick through the lambs. We did elect to take, after going through the ewes in the wethers, we went through and took a tail off on the draft. Again, they're probably all twin-born, late born and twin-born lambs and out of tutors and that sort of stuff. I guess when it comes to the wether selection, so there's 2 jobs to do in the wethers, and so we're looking for a couple of different cash crops, I suppose. So one is some replacements to go out on the hill for their foreseeable future, and so they're being selected for their wool cutting ability and wool quality. And so that was the first sort of cut and the highest priority. So I went through about 2,800 wethers to pull out 800 that would stay on as replacement wethers, or most of them will. There's then the next tier of wethers which are to hang around and be winter lambs, so go through winter, be finished over that winter period, one shearing, and then sold off to go into premium products like Solaire, hopefully, but into that product just before cutting their teeth as a 1-year-old. Pretty traditional, I guess, production system here in New Zealand to get some extra value out of those lambs. But so picking them was pretty easy. So that was basically the biggest ones because they're the closest to finish. So and then so the first one, wool quality, anything annoying about them, too wrinkly or excessively wrinkly, we can take a bit of wrinkle into that wether flock. Looking for good nourishment in the wool, just they're going to go out onto the hill, so they keep the dust out of that wool. And then wool quality, obviously, because they're sort of main job, and fine, looking for, ideally we'll try and drive a sort of 17, 18 micron wether, so anything that was a bit harsh on it was getting kicked out as well. But we did run them through the gate because we're not, obviously none of their genetics are passing on, so the decision is about how do we maximise the value from here on in, and we know that a single born wether is actually your choice whether to go out on the hill, because the single born had that different follicle differentiation or follicle development than a twin. So back from sort of day 90 onwards, when secondary follicles are developing in the skin of a lamb or in a fetus, you're getting those single born lambs that are getting more uterine nutrition are actually developing or having greater follicle branching, more secondary follicles developed. And that means that their fibre will be slightly finer for their entire life, and they'll actually cut a bit more wool. So opposite to when you're selecting ewes, you're kind of trying to stop your bias towards those twin singles, because they'll always look good, they'll be big, they'll have nice wool, they'll have nice nourishment. And so you're always trying to make sure you don't just select them, you're trying to make sure you get a balance of them plus the twins that might not look so shiny, because that reproductive effort is important and for going forward. But in those singles where you're just going to be cutting wool, so you actually want your early born singles, so kind of ripping them off on the draft means that you end up with mainly early born singles, which are good and had a good uterine environment, and they're the ones that are going to cut your wool going forward. So it's kind of, I guess, what we would class as a bit of a traditional classing, where you sort of just pick the big ones. When it comes to wethers, it actually works beautifully, because that's really what you're after. And when you get the opportunity to pull only 800 out of 2,800, it means you can definitely get some good ones. And so, great line of lambs that we pulled off for that job. And then, very obvious next step down was the next drop of lambs, which are those ones that were hanging around for winter finishing. They're definitely not as good in the wool, but that's not that important. It's only one shearing, and then the rest will be on a truck in a couple of days. So they're going out store here in New Zealand. There's a pretty solid market going down onto the Canterbury plain, where crop farmers bring in some lambs to utilise their land before they'll grow another crop from spring onwards, or they'll have different finishing farms on the flat. Then we'll grab those lighter lambs and put them on good feed. And what we know is from previous people buying them, like we've bolted in a lot of good genetics into the Glenthorne lambs in terms of their growth and carcass. And so once they've given an opportunity, those lambs, they'll hum. So a bit of a win-win, people picking them up for good value because they haven't got a lot of weight this year, but then they'll turn into money. And so and I guess that's the thing with genetics. You want to be securing good markets. You want to be delivering a product that people take and it delivers well for them, so they're lining up to get it next year. And if you bolt in that carcass and that growth, in addition to the wool value, it's an animal that people are going to want to come back and buy, particularly those finishing farmers. And it's a big thing. Well, it's a bit of a byproduct of the whole system, I suppose. But the end of the day, that income from surplus livestock sales is probably going to be over half of the income on a lot of farms, even though they might consider themselves as wool producing farms. There's still a big chunk of their income, unless they're into the specialty wools, which is coming from meat sales. So it's important that we maximise that, and the way to maximise that is to really deliver a product that people, that those finishing farms get a lot of value out of, and therefore line up again next year. In the sort of post-match debrief, sort of a bit discussion around what's the balance of merino versus pure merino mating versus terminal avid merino. I haven't done the economics recently, but most of the times when you do it, there's a lot of money in a terminal avid merino system. So having that balance of how many merino used or need to mate to a merino ram versus how many can I mate to a terminal to produce that lamb that's is closer to finishing is a much more desirable product. They're obviously going to wean heavier, but they're also got a lot more growth potential in them, and they're a lamb that people can pick up, store at Christmas time, and have them finished before winter, well and surely. And so, yeah, there's plenty of opportunities for that. So, yeah, it's always, some places have gone down to 50-50, where 50% of the ewes are going to the terminal, 50% going back to merino to generate that replacement. And then some probably more comfortably at 60-40, 60% merinos and 40% terminals. A lot of people are sitting around that 15-20%, but I think we can crank that up. And because you generate a lot of, I guess what you're trading off is selection pressure versus sort of saleability of product and income from that product. And so you don't want to wind it back too far where you're having to keep a heap of lambs that you really don't want to keep because they've got faults. But equally, if you generate a heap of extras, then you've got a lot of product, a lot of animals that aren't as desirable for those finishing farms, and therefore, and then you're selling a lot of ewes. And in Australia, you get good value for those, or most ewes, you get good values for those extra ewes generated. So it's an easier system to maybe stay pure merino, because that sale merino ewe that's second grade to you has got an easy and ready. Because that second class ewe to you is a readily saleable, and plenty of people chasing them to probably put a terminal over themselves, or even replacement ewes. But here in New Zealand, where merino ewes don't tend to trade at anywhere near the premium that they could or would in Australia, then it makes sense not to generate heaps of them if they're actually hard to shift. I think that'll change over time, hopefully, as people as we get the merino more or better adapted to wetter climates through the foot-rot work that's going on, which is definitely having an impact. Then that might change, but at the moment, I think it's still sensible not to generate a heap of excess ewes and wether lambs that actually aren't going to be involved in the production system going forward. So that's something that certainly discussed, no firm decisions made, but it's something a discussion we have quite regularly about. What balance in our ram team should we have? We like simplicity. We don't like generating heaps of extra work or complexity. So if people are happy with their straight merino systems, then they'll probably stay that way. If you're running a few terminals, then it probably makes sense to think about what that proportion is. to change the outcome from yesterday. And I guess a lot of people are making a transition where you're trying to shift from a particular sheep type, or you've changed genetics, and so you want the selection pressure, so you want to keep heaps of females around so you can select the best types, ones that have picked up the attributes from the old that you wanted and from the new that you shifted for. And so once you're through that, and at Glenthorne we're 4 or 5 years through that transition, you're starting to get a much more even type that you're happy with, and so the selection pressure isn't as hot. And then if we weren't there yesterday going through lambs, we'd be less likely to be putting sort of negative pressure on those late-born twins and that sort of stuff, because if they run through, then in a few months' time after a bit of feed, they might look quite different animals. But anyway, a bit of a summary today, heading back into another gloomy day, so we had a bit of sun yesterday afternoon, which was awesome. It was actually a good working day yesterday, nice and overcast in the morning, and then a bit of sun in the afternoon to cheer up the troops. Didn't get too hot, so the lambs kept running pretty well, really. Anyway, that's it for this video, but we'll look forward to chatting next time on Head Shepherd. Remember to check out the hub.nextgenagri.com, which is where we put all things Head Shepherd or Head Shepherd podcast, which you'll find anywhere you get your podcasts, and yeah, some great episodes there across all things livestock farming, really, or even through product. Great to have a chat to the people using wool and using meat and doing that in innovative ways. Always good to have those discussions on Head Shepherd, or check out us at www.nextgenagri.com in terms of what we do for farmers, and if you're interested in getting the team involved. Talk soon, cheers.